Welcome back to another template video, and we're back at Charleston Hall for this one, and we're going to look at the narrows today, which is a concept that I think many people will use naturally in their designs but may not make the most of. So what is a narrows? Well, it's defined by tightening the landing area on both sides. As you can see, we've got two fairway bunkers here that are tightening the landing area directly around about 300. What this does is it requires a very accurate drive and puts pressure on the tee shots in order to secure a good look at the green and a shorter club in. So it's a relatively simple concept, but how can you really make the most of it? So leaping back to the tee, and what you'll see is exactly as described. You are basically presented with a very clear challenge. Can you split those bunkers? With the longest driver, you're potentially in either bunker. If you miss, you can lay up or hit a partial. Obviously, shorter drivers, you may still end up running into those bunkers, so they're kind of carry hazards for the longest driver, but roll out hazards for shorter ones. They're still in play no matter what your driver distance. But you're never going to be able to carry them. You've got to take them on. If we're laying up to 3-wood, we've got this cool bunker that straddles both fairways, that's pinching fairway a little bit, not as much as here, so there's less challenge, but you can still take on 3-wood. And if you're laying way back, he's giving you loads of room to do so. You're just putting all of that pressure on the second shot. What I particularly like about this interpretation of the template is that it's a very long hole. We're looking at 480 yards, and therefore the pressure is really ramped up if you decide not to go for it. If we look at the green itself, there's an interesting feature on it with that kind of tier and multiple little small spines on this one. There's a lot of interest going on there, and therefore what that means is you still don't want to be going in there with a long iron. If we're laying back to 3-wood distance, we're potentially hitting about 200 yards in still, which is not what you want. So it's forcing us to take on that main strategic feature with those two bunkers. Again, if you're laying up way back here and hitting a wood in, I mean, you will be able to get close, and there's these. If you're heading into an area, these two slopes will funnel you relatively close. Both of those will put you around about here, so it's doable. And then for other pins, this big tier will run you down towards this one, or going up to here, you just have to get your distance control about right. So this is the one that requires probably the most precision, and therefore it's a really good pin one, because it's going to show off the character of the hole as much as possible. You want to be taking on that gap. So back at Raynor Ridge, and now on our third hole, which is our narrows template here, and you can see straight away that you've got that bunkering cutting in. Also, interestingly, a bit of a diagonal, so it does offer you a bit of a chance to just cut the corner a touch, which means that you're either, depending on quite how far left or right you are, you're either challenging this bunker or these bunkers. With this one, it's shorter than the one we looked at Charleston Hall, so you can lay up way back here and you'll still have a shot in that's not overly long. So if we're looking at laying to 250 odd, you can have an 8-iron or a 7-iron in. So that's very much doable, whereas if you're challenging that and getting through, you're looking at a wedge. So it's still testing the same thing with that courage off the tee. Angles wise, this does kind of allow you a bit more of an option with how the green's working. Again, you've got that little spine in the middle that can push your ball a little bit closer to. But so for this pin over there, we want to be, it's encouraging us to challenge those bunkers and really sneak down this side as much as possible to open up that angle, or to lay up kind of towards these two bunkers and take them on, rather than the more in the middle you are, the more you're taking on that right green side bunker. I also love the way this one intersects with the hole just to the right of it, which I can't remember off the top of my head. And the lighting just makes this one pop. I think it's a really cool hole and just generally works very, very well. Same concept, slightly shorter hole, which means that you may consider laying up a little bit more readily than the one on Charleston Hall, but same exact concept. So what about spins on a narrows? How do you make it interesting or put a twist on it? Well, to be honest, there's not that many ways. We're looking at the 7th at Old Ainsdale now, which is a hole that, well, a course that Joe and I built together. And this one's very much a narrows in the sense of the fairway narrows significantly around about driver distance, and you've got this one bunker, and then the only spin I can really think of is that, well, the water comes in diagonally, so it's narrowing the further you go, but in that sense. Also, with this one then,
Your ideal line into the green is as close as you can possibly get to the water. We wanted it to make it so that you really challenged it, and therefore from there, as you can see, you avoid these bunkers. You can tend to go right over them, and most of the green slopes will then help you. You've got a bit of a backstop there, slight one here, and you can get dead at the front pin with no real issues. Conversely though, if you chose to lay up, this was always meant to be the hardest challenging template course, even if not all of them were templates that we could make. If you laid up, you've got loads of room to do so. You're then just facing 225 yards, bringing those bunkers more into play. Tough green where you want to be short of the pins if at all possible, and therefore for like a front pin, taking 200 yards into that means you're really challenging this bunker, and you're having to land it just about here to have any chance of being close. Whereas if you're making it all the way down here, well, you're looking at a bit of an 8 iron, 9 iron, and you can get around that bunker a little bit more to reach this part of the green and have probably a relatively straightforward putt. So still a narrows, still the same concept. It's about how you try to make that fairway narrow a little bit, and then equally as ever, having that green shape and angle really accentuate the same hole design. So if we really want you to be close to the water, let's have a green that's basically angled on the same line. So usually if you take that measure tool and draw the angle of the green and generally run it towards in the same direction, you will then put hazards in such a way that if you're not coming from that angle, you are having to cross those hazards, like here. Now the angles may be subtle, so you can see lots of measure tools, but if you look at these two lines, one of them's coming over these bunkers, one of them isn't. It does require some subtlety, but you can make it very much work. Okay, for our next twist on the narrows, we've come to the 9th at Springbrook Country Club, so another Joe template course. And with this one you can see immediately we've got the narrows, and I'd say this one is very much daring you not to go through it, but almost to go and finish up around about there. Because of where the fairway is cut with this driver, I think we're looking at a partial and just rolling up to finish at that point. So you've then got the options, and kind of with, as you might see with other, well, we'll look at the prize dogleg video, you're also looking at where the fairway starts and therefore where you're landing, which adds an extra dimension to how you're thinking about getting to this point. You can lay up over here as well, or you could lay up way short, and because it's not that long of a hole as we saw with the others, you can lay up and know that you've still got a shot in. What really makes this hole though, not just the tee shot, which I think is great for trying to get you to think about where your ball is going to finish up on which side of the fairway, but it's the green complex that makes this one. And you've got this big plateau back right, to the extent that you could call this a plateau hole, and no one would argue. You've got a bunker short in the middle, so you've got an aspect of, it's not wrapping around like a lion's mouth, but there's an aspect of that. And you've got a runoff to the left hand side as well. Sculpting, as ever, is absolutely immaculate. So if we look at where we're going to finish and where we want to play to for this pin, well, this pin gives us all sorts of options. You can, if you make it to the far left of the fairway, you're unimpeded and you're avoiding this tier. If you end up on the right hand side of the fairway, you're having to deal with that and maybe land it at the top and roll it down, or worry about can you land it at the bottom and stop it. So that really comes into play, and Joe's great at putting pin 1 somewhere that really emphasises the key qualities of the hole. If we then look at where other pin positions are, well, back right, and it kind of flips the whole strategy like we talked about with the lion's mouth. You want to be on this side of the fairway so that you're not having to worry about coming across the tier again. Or you could argue that you maybe want to be this side, again still on the left hand side, so that you're hitting away from that tier and not running down it, whereas if you're hitting from the right hand side, you're hitting more towards that tier, and there's potential that a fast swing ends up all the way down there. You then got further pin positions here and here, which have that hint of lion's mouth about them. So I think this one is just a really clever, nuanced hole. And how's he done it? Well, that narrows really does work with the bunkering, just basically saying you can try to hit through here, but it's got to be an absolutely perfect shot. And then that really clever green complex with, I'd say, the one bunker you absolutely need is the front one, and this really cool sloping and the runoffs. So you're always thinking about not wanting to miss it left, and the more you're hitting from the right hand side of the fairway, the more chance you've got of missing it left. Whereas if you're hitting from the left, well, you can hit towards that slope a little bit and it will bring the ball back down. So again, real subtlety with angles. It's very careful design, and it will take you a number of times before you get this one perfect, but it's well worth persevering with, because when it's right, it's brilliant. So that's the narrows for you. It's a really straightforward template that, like you say, will have been used by many of you, but it's about how to use that really effectively, and hopefully this has given you some ideas on how you might, first of all, choke the driving landing area, but then also make the most of the angles that you generate with that. It's a really good hole for really ramping up the pressure on the drive rather than approach shot so much, but giving people a choice to make as well that's really simple. Do you have the courage to go for this or not? Hopefully that's been useful, and see you again soon.